Imagine this. You wake up in a bed of yellow silk. You're the most powerful person on earth. Your every word is law, and your every whim is met. In your world, you own everything, including the past, present, and future. And for 227 years, that might have been true. But now history is finally seeing the person behind the veil. A person who was so self-obsessed, he erased his wife for defying him, put his stamps all over ancient artworks, drained his national treasury, and feigned innocence while getting his officials to do his dirty work. I'm talking about the Qianlong Emperor. And by the end of this episode, I promise you'll see why the Qianlong Emperor is history's greatest gaslighter. The most famous example we have of Qianlong rewriting history is the incident of his second empress, Empress Nara, cutting her hair. The act was seen as so shocking that the woman at the supposed center of the world lost her life as she knew it in the span of a few hours. This might be the most well-known account of Qianlong editing history. But it's certainly not the first. So let's take a look at what is. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I cover deep dives into history and the lives of the past. And if you've been following my series on Qianlong's court, you'll know that I've previously touched on Empress Fucha, Qianlong's greatest love, Empress Nara, the woman history tried to erase, and Empress Xiao Yichun, the woman who had to die before she could become empress. And today we're taking it up a notch and peeling back the layers of the personality and psychology of the man who tried to edit the very essence of history itself, the Qianlong Emperor. So hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's dive into the life of the Qing dynasty's last great emperor. Our story's humble beginnings start on September 25th, 1711, around 11 to 1 a.m., deep in the inner halls of Yonghegong, Prince Yong's manor, just outside of the walls of the Forbidden City. A royal baby is about to be born to a Gege, a low-ranking woman in the imperial harem. Her name is Lady Nuhuru, a woman who accidentally ended up in the imperial selection some years earlier. She wasn't particularly favored, and nothing about this birth was out of the ordinary or really an occasion to celebrate. But surrounded by the warm, flickering light of candles, and with one last agonizing push, she birthed Prince Hongli and brought the future Qianlong Emperor into the world. Looking back at that event without any prior knowledge of history, you would think his birth was a momentous occasion that was celebrated the empire over. But it wasn't. It wasn't until 11 years later, in 1722, when the now almost teenage Hongli is exploring Yuan Mingyuan, the Garden of Perfect Brilliance, that his life and status would change forever. He finally met his grandfather for the first time, the Kangxi Emperor. Now, if you're surprised by that, I don't blame you. To only meet your grandson for the first time at 12 years old? By today's standards, it seems a little strange, but here's the thing. When the boy was born, Kangxi already had between 50 and 60 other grandchildren, and he was dealing with his own family drama involving his future line of succession. So when Prince Hongli was born to a low-ranking Gege, the royal baby never crossed his grandfather's mind. Nevertheless, upon meeting his grandson, Kangxi was reportedly taken aback by the prince's demeanor and intelligence. In fact, he was so impressed that he would take Prince Hongli to live with him, and for the next few months, Emperor Kangxi personally oversaw the boy's education and training. It was as if the current ruler of the world was telling this teenager, "You are special. You're above all other people around you. You are the golden apple handpicked by me for the throne." It's speculated that Kangxi only selected Prince Yong as the Yongjung Emperor because of his ambitions for Hongli, which is a story for another day. He was placed above his father in terms of worth, And in the hierarchical systems of the Qing dynasty, that was bound to give a person a complex. And then, at the tender age of 16, he marries his first wife, Lady Fucha from the Fucha clan. A few years later, he added Lady Gao, Lady Chun, Lady Jia, and finally, Lady Nara. During this time in his life, Prince Hongli was living inside of Chonghuagong within the walls of the Forbidden City. Hongli would spend his time studying languages, art, calligraphy, martial arts, music, and most notably, poetry. During his lifetime, Qianlong would write just over 40,000 poems. That's more than any other emperor in history, and he would use poems to curb his boredom, convey his inner thoughts and emotions, or just record seemingly trivial things and events. There are even documented occasions during his rule where he used poetry as a warning and a threat to high-ranking court officials, who he felt stepped out of line. Poetry for Qianlong became, in a way, an extension of his inner workings and beliefs. But it's here that we start to see some of Qianlong's hypocrisy peek through. Within the first few years of ascending the throne, we see him quickly making his mark. He moved fast to consolidate power, showing the world that he wasn't just a figurehead. One of his first acts as emperor was to tighten the control over court officials, centralizing authority through the secret memorial system his father had perfected. Officials now reported directly to him, bypassing the usual bureaucratic layers, and he used this to quietly test loyalty and root out potential rivals. At the same time, he wasn't just testing the limits of how far he could push things, he was shaping his image as a cultured and moral ruler. He commissioned massive literary projects, collected art, and expanded the imperial library, creating the foundations for what would become the Suku Chuanshu, the largest collection of books in Chinese history. And there was another book that was published too. A book that the emperor himself refused to publish back in 1737 because he didn't want to be seen as competing with the literary scholars. But behind these displays of refinement, a pattern starts to emerge. One of control, obsession with legacy, and rewriting reality to suit his own narrative. Even in his personal life, Qianlong was already blending public and private authority into one. He would organize his harem carefully, promoting consorts strategically, rewarding loyalty, and punishing what he perceived to be slights, essentially laying the groundwork for a court culture where fear, favor, and manipulation were all intertwined. By 1765, all of these traits, his love for literature, his obsession with control, his meticulous attention to appearances, they would all collide in a way that show not just a ruler, but a master manipulator of history itself. Qianlong used his poetry to retrospectively justify his actions and to claim a sense of prophetic governance. For instance, when a major corruption case was discovered in Zhejiang in 1781 involving high-ranking officials who had been siphoning state funds, he claimed he had sensed the trouble during a previous southern tour. And to back up these claims, he produced a poem he allegedly wrote years earlier that referenced his concerns. And he took it a step further by attaching that poem to a formal edict as a warning to his officials. He did two things here. One, he effectively made himself the all-seeing eye. And two, he gave himself the ability to rewrite history to make himself look better. Qianlong carefully edited his public persona by playing a deceptive game regarding the publication of his work. In 1737, he issued a formal edict declaring that his collection of poems should not be circulated, claiming it would be inappropriate for an emperor to compete with scholars of the past. That statement was recorded, it was official, and it made him appear restrained. However, this was a facade. He actually deeply craved the literary notoriety. he relied on his officials to disobey him. And soon, his officials began submitting memorials insisting that the emperor's poetry was too important to withhold from the world. The pressure to publish, conveniently, came from them and not him. Getting his officials to do this was necessary to justify breaking his vow, once again ensuring that the historical record showed a reluctant monarch being persuaded by the desperate needs of his people, rather than a vain one seeking fame. It was that easy for Qianlong to get what he wanted without getting his hands dirty or touching his reputation. As his reign progressed, Qianlong moved away from viewing poetry as self-entertainment, and he began using it to record military and agricultural affairs. He added extensive notes and explanations to these poems, effectively turning them into official historical documentation. And by attaching the poems to the edicts, he ensured that his specific interpretation of the events, and his supposed role in them, were physically and legally etched into the empire's history. This tells me that much of the surviving historical record from his reign were carefully curated to suppress all of his flaws, and instead were pruned to present a sanitized, idealized, and almost godlike version of himself. At one point, he even edited what he had already published to fix entries he now viewed as unfavorable years later. He had the entire book remade to remove the unfavorable portion and commanded that all previous copies were to be confiscated and erased. Toward the end of his reign, Qianlong's editing of history reached a delusional level. His officials began to claim in official postscripts that his poetry was even with heaven and earth, and possessed cosmic significance. By allowing these claims, Qianlong elevated the narrative of his reign from political history to a manifestation of heavenly order, suggesting that his record of governance was as eternal and unchangeable as nature itself. To Qianlong, he was a god. And now that we understand what Qianlong was up to in his own life, we can take a look back in time. So let's return to 1765, the year that everything would collide. It was Qianlong's fourth southern tour. The emperor traveled with an entourage of 2,000 to 3,000 people moving through the region in a carefully choreographed spectacle. They had Mongolian yurts, military encampments, and imperial guards, all designed to project an image. And traveling with him was his second empress, Lady Nara, the woman who, according to popular rumor, would commit the ultimate act of defiance while on this trip by cutting her hair. This incident would be the beginning of Qianlong's unraveling, the moment when the cracks in his perfect facade would finally start to show. By the center of his inner palace, literally cutting through the denial, Qianlong's authority was challenged publicly, and his ego couldn't take that. As with the rest of the events in his life, Qianlong wanted to ensure that history recorded Empress Nara's rapid fall from grace through his own perspective to protect his reputation in the annals of history. Everything that he did to Empress Nara were all things we've seen from Qianlong before. His scrubbing and rewriting of history for his own versions of events. Notably, he would go on to write about his 10 great campaigns, the military victories he claimed proved the mandate of heaven. It turns out that 4 of them were actually failures, repackaged as success through careful propaganda. Between 1765 and 1769, Qing forces launched 4 invasions of Burma. Tens of thousands of troops were deployed. Disease ravaged the ranks. Supply lines collapsed in tropical terrain that the army was not prepared for. And the campaigns ended in a negotiated truce, and the Qing forces left. Yet in official records, these expeditions are absorbed into the 10 Great Campaigns. That's a phrase that Qianlong himself promoted to frame his reign as militarily glorious. And then there was He Shen, Qianlong's son-in-law, By the 1770s, Qianlong had become so tolerant of corruption that he allowed a young guard named He Shen to rise to become one of the most powerful and corrupt officials in Chinese history. For over 20 years, He Shen systematically embezzled from the imperial treasury, enriching himself beyond measure while the emperor turned a blind eye. Some historians speculate that their relationship was intimate. Others suggest that Qianlong simply enjoyed the arrangement of not having to focus on the government, while some theorize that he turned a blind eye because He Shen was married to his favorite daughter. Either way, by the time of Qianlong's death, He Shen's personal fortune exceeded the entire imperial treasury. The Qing Empire was quietly rotting from within, even as Qianlong composed poems celebrating his own benevolence, which is in stark contrast to what was actually happening at the time. The White Lotus Rebellion that erupted in 1796 was a massive peasant uprising that would drag on for nearly a decade. Qianlong spent his final years watching his military fail to suppress it, his treasury drained, and his carefully constructed image of perfection was crumbling before his very eyes. And what did he do? He abdicated. Not out of humility, but out of respect for his grandfather Kangxi's 61-year reign. Qianlong abdicated in 1796 after exactly 60 years, that's 1 year less than Kangxi, to avoid the appearance of outdoing his grandfather. But here's the thing. He didn't really abdicate, not in practice anyway. He retained the ultimate authority through the title of Taishanghuang, Supreme Abdicated Emperor, and he continued ruling behind the scenes, pulling the strings of his son, the Jiaqing Emperor, until his death in February 1799 at the age of 87, that is. 5 days after Qianlong died, his successor finally moved against He Shen, charging him with corruption and forcing him to commit suicide. The truth could finally be spoken, but only after the emperor who'd enabled it for so long was finally dead. So when we talk about Qianlong today, we have to ask ourselves, what are we actually looking at here? Are we seeing history, or are we seeing the story that Qianlong wanted us to see? But strip away the poetry, the painting, the propaganda, and what do you find? A man who destroyed a woman for one act of defiance and erased her from history. A ruler who called military disasters victories and had them recorded as such. An emperor who enabled massive corruption while composing verses about his own virtue. And a monarch who manipulated historical records so thoroughly that even today scholars struggle to separate fact from fiction. Qianlong didn't just rule an empire, he ruled reality itself. He understood that power isn't just about controlling people in the present. It's about controlling how they remember you in the future. And that's what makes him history's greatest gaslighter. So what do you think of this story? If you had to choose, which moment best exposes Qianlong's need to control his legacy? The erasure of Empress Nara? The repackaged military victories? Or protecting He Shen? And why? As always, drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button. It really does help the algorithm show this video to more history nerds like us. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the more you know.